Children's books often have this sense of like loss, sense of pain, and then resolution. And like this story has that. But it also has a story of friendship.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and I have an admission I must make to the entire audience about my attitude. You're not going to want to miss this. Later on in the pod, Missy and I sat down with the Reverend Paul Raushenbush, the president and CEO of Interfaith Alliance. Paul's got a brand new children's book out titled Together We Rise, an Easter story for us all. And it is a delightful conversation. It's a great pod that you're not going to want to miss. So stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing quite well, and you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
I'm having a bit of an I told you so moment this week. It's pretty fun.
Would you like to explain, or would you like for me to explain?
You go for it. Tell me how I'm right.
Yes, I have to say in front of God and everybody that you are right. Monday, I wake up. I'm a bit grumpy. I don't understand all
Just
of the...
Monday?
Very true.
Okay.
I don't understand all the hoopla around the eclipse, but you make us go down to Texas where totality is going to be experienced by all. So we make the 2.5-hour trip on Monday down to Dallas-Fort Worth, and we arrive. We get set up a couple of hours early. I'm still, kind of grumpy, not feeling very well, but still kind of grumpy, not seeing what the big deal is.
A little grumpy? Did you say that?
And then the hour drew near, and the moon did its magic, and the eclipse began to emerge. And when totality hit, I'm going to go ahead and say it was probably one of the greatest natural experiences of my entire life.
It was pretty incredible, I have to admit.
And the most important part is you were right. I was wrong.
Okay, I just needed you to circle back to that real quick. So I have some comments about the eclipse. It was one of those things where, do we do it? Do we not do it? The weather was iffy, and is this going to be worth it? It was kind of a headache. We're in the middle of a move, blah, 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 all the things. Yeah. So we did, and I want to say a couple of days before, I happened to be walking to a place of business, and they had the news going in the background, and the newscaster was interviewing a woman named Jessica Lanyado, who's an astrologer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Astrologist.
Yeah, not astronomer, astrologer, like the moon signs, the sun signs. Okay. And she was saying, and I'm interested in all of that. I think it's fascinating. But something she said, I was so giddy because she talked about the eclipse being big news in astrology. This is a time when things come to the surface, feelings demand to be dealt with. Okay. In particular, big Aries emotions. Who's an Aries?
You.
Me. So, yes. And she said a lot of people, especially Aries, are feeling a big sense of urgency, feeling big feelings. And guess what?
You are.
Yes. And also, according to research, though they didn't specify whose research, the effects can last up to 6 months.
Oh, no.
So,
may let you move into that house by yourself for a while.
That's right. So it was very interesting. So that was one thing that I wanted to note about the eclipse. But something else that I wanted to touch on about the eclipse specifically is, for me, the fact that there's no piece of technology that can ever compare to the majesty, to the just sense of awe in a natural natural phenomenon.
Right.
I mean, there's just not.
Yeah.
It was amazing. But the other thing that I noted, because we did go down and we found just the last minute, found a, an outdoor restaurant to sit at that was having a little eclipse party. And I sat there on the ground when totality hit, and I realized it wasn't just the eclipse, but there's something about a collective moment shared with other people. And in that moment, those, I don't know how many, 200-300 people that were there, like you felt a connection with them, and I didn't know them, but you shared a moment. And I was thinking of other moments that we share together, for whether it's New Year's Eve or a Super Bowl or whatever it is, that brings you together as human beings is part of the magic. It's part of the beauty of these moments. Yeah. So I just really did take some time to appreciate that everyone, all of a sudden you're talking to people, you're experiencing, you're oohing and awing over this thing that's happening. Just how important collective moments are for us as human beings.
I mean, you're absolutely right. For me, it was a bit of a paradox because you're staring up at the sky and you're watching this natural phenomenon take place. And you have this great sense of smallness, of insignificance about you, realizing you're just a dot in this universe that we're in. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you have this collected experience with fellow human beings who are strangers.
Right.
And so while I'm feeling small, I'm also feeling large because I'm part of a human community. And there's something beautiful about both of those. And it was interesting. I mean, you look around that outdoor restaurant we were at, I mean, we were all in awe. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything else didn't matter for just those 4 minutes that we were in totality. And even afterwards, we were all smiling and celebrating, and just the sense of excitement, the sense of awness about this universe that we live in. It was just really inspiring. And again, you were right. I was wrong.
I did hear a funny quip, and I'm sad I didn't write down where this came from, but somebody, as the news is talking about it constantly, the days leading up to it, what do you do for your animals, and how do you protect them? And it was a scientist who said, the animals know what to do. It's the humans that are dumb enough to look at the sun. So don't worry about your animals. Right. I thought that was kind of funny. And I did in that, outdoor area, I saw several people, glancing up without the glasses on. And I thought, yep, we're just all pretty dense.
That's exactly right.
So I did do some Googling, and I found out there will be 2 eclipses upcoming on your birthday.
2?
2.
Wow.
One.
So the universe does center on me.
Okay. Yeah. So one, August 12th, 2026, over Greenland, Iceland, Spain, Russia, and a small part of Portugal. That one's iffy just because of the climate and the cloudiness there, but they'll get 2 minutes, a maximum of 2 minutes, 18 seconds of totality. So if you want to start planning our vacation, you can go ahead and do that. But the next one, August after that will come here, literally right over us, if we're still here, is August 12th, 2045.
That's a long path, if I recall.
Yeah,
across the entire United States.
Yeah, and you'll be years old. And so you may be experiencing it from the other side. We're not sure. But yeah, pretty cool.
That is so cool. Well, 2 on my birthday. That's amazing.
Absolutely. So what's else been going on this week?
Well, Missy, I don't know if you've seen the news lately, but Arizona decided to reach way back into their past. In fact, so far into their past, they reached back to a law before they were even a state during the Civil War era, just to outlaw abortion care for women.
I've heard about this.
It is infuriating. Now, the good news is they're trying to get it on the ballot for a future vote. What we've known across the country, what we've seen in other states, even states that are very conservative, is that citizens want abortion care. They think it's important. They think women's health is something that every woman should be afforded. So that's the good news. But until then, this law that was passed in 1864 is now in place. If a doctor is caught giving an abortion, minimum 3 to 5 years. the woman would receive a minimum 1-year sentence, all going straight to prison, as according to the 1864 law states. But if that's not infuriating enough, the old argument of states' rights has once again emerged. Mm-hmm. DJT, in a speech this week, talked about the importance of returning this issues to the states so that they can decide. I am appalled by this mindset and this ideology, because it seems as though anytime white males in this country want to enact and impose their fundamentalist theology and their draconian politics, they talk about states' rights. They did it during slavery. They did it during Jim Crow. They did it during civil rights for voting rights. Mm-hmm. They've done it for same-sex marriage, and now they're doing it for abortion care. Anytime they want to oppress somebody that they don't agree with or they feel is the other, they talk about states' rights. Mm-hmm. And it's infuriating, and it just drives me crazy. Because of this, the founders settled this matter long ago, because in Article 6 of the Constitution, it clearly states that the U.S. Constitution and the federal government reign supreme on the states. Why did they do that? Because after the Revolutionary War, the states were arguing among themselves, lands disputes, all kinds of different things taking place. Mm-hmm. And so the founders realized they needed to have a central authority to bring solidarity to the country and to address issues that were in the nation's best interest. Now, yes, they rejected the centrality of the British monarchy mm-hmm. at the time because they didn't have any representation. But the reality is, yes, we're a republic. Yes, we're a democratic republic. But the founders wrote in the Constitution the safeguard of the Constitution reigning supreme. And the justices who've ruled on this in the past, in 73 in Roe v. Wade, this is why I was so upset in the recent Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe, was that in that decision in 73, the justices talked about the Constitution and made their ruling based upon the 14th Amendment and due process and the right of privacy. They utilized the Constitution to enact that law and to make that decision, protecting abortion care for all women across the United States. And now it's been taken back, and the argument of states' rights is back on the table, and it's infuriating to me. I'm angry about it.
Tell us how you really feel.
I'm a little grumpy. I need more totality. Anywho, that's what's been going on in the news as far as I'm concerned this week. I wrote about it in my weekly column at goodfaithmedia.org. My article's entitled, if you want to read it, States' Rights, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I'm really miffed about this. But again, if there's a silver lining, that Arizona is going to get to vote on abortion care for their citizens in the future.
And we've seen how that goes.
Yes, we have seen how that goes, and hopefully the voters will turn out and women will have their rights back.
I hope so.
Yep. Well, you and I got to sit down with one of our dear friends in our little world, the Reverend Paul Raushenbush. Paul has a brand new book out. He is the president and CEO of Interfaith Alliance, and his new book is entitled Together We Rise, An Easter Story. And so we had a delightful conversation with him.
We did. I always enjoy talking to Paul, and this was such a fun interview, talking about something a little different, talking about a children's book. So it was good.
Yep. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with Reverend Paul Raushenbush.
This episode is brought to you by the Summit for Religious Freedom.
Christian nationalists, extremists, and their political allies are working overtime to impose their narrow religious beliefs on all of us.
Learn how to fight back at the Summit for Religious Freedom on April 13th to the 16th in Washington, D.C. We're organizing to defend LGBTQ+ rights, abortion, contraception, and reproductive rights, our public schools, our democracy, and the separation of church and state.
The Summit for Religious Freedom is the hub for this collective fight. thesrf.org. That's thesrf.org. Has all the details. Use promo code GOODFAITH for 10% off registration.
Anyone can attend virtually, and current students can attend the summit virtually for free. Scholarships are also available.
SRF sold out last year, and tickets are going fast. Don't sleep on this. Visit thesrf.org today, and don't forget to use promo code GOODFAITH for 10% off registration.
The summit is hosted by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Freedom without favor and equality without exception.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. The Reverend Paul Raushenbush is president and CEO of Interfaith Alliance. An ordained Baptist minister, Reverend Raushenbush is a longtime leader in the interfaith movement, working to protect an inclusive version of religious freedom for people of all faiths and none. As the great-grandson and first Jewish Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis and great-grandson of Baptist theologian Walter Raushenbush, a key figure in the social gospel movement, Reverend Raushenbush's commitment to interfaith advocacy comes in part from his own interfaith background. Paul has a brand new children's book out, Together We Rise, an Easter story for us all. Paul, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
I am so glad to be with you. Thank you to both of you for having me.
So, Paul, we haven't talked in a while on the pod. The last time we had you on, you had just started your new role with Interfaith Alliance. So now I assume the honeymoon is over. The fire hose to the face moment has passed. So tell us now, how are things going? What exciting things do you have planned for Interfaith Alliance?
The honeymoon moment may be over, but actually the commitment has only deepened. And it is, it's been really the honor of a lifetime to serve in this position. And I've never felt more called to a moment and to an organization. It's, obviously a really difficult, challenging moment in our country around the question of what is a good role of religion in society? How can religion be something that makes people come together more, makes people love one another more committed to the well-being of people like themselves, but also different? And that's what we're faced with today in our country. And seeing like this real force as, sometimes we use the term Christian nationalism, but this has been around for a long time of people who really want to say my way or the highway. And, everybody else is here because I'm allowing them to be here. But really, we have to be, a kind of very specific kind of religious expression. And what we're finding is that a lot of people are responding to the message of Interfaith Alliance and the message that both of you also share, which is really, actually, there's a bigger vision out there for how religion can function. And if we join together and say, actually, conservative Christians, we want you too. We want everybody to join together, but we don't want one tradition to dominate over all the others. And so Interfaith Alliance has seen incredible growth over the last almost 2 years that I've been the president. We've seen the need expanding as we've seen censorship rising. I mean, and that's like just one example. I mean, who would have thought that we'd be talking about people just taking books off the shelf? Mm-hmm. I was speaking at one of our affiliates in Southwest Florida, and the headline at the local newspaper was 600 titles taken off shelves.
Oh my goodness!
That day, and so one of the things that Interfaith Alliance has been doing is really working with the American Library Association, with PEN America, and with schools and others, saying, religion actually doesn't want censorship. It's really bad. Censorship is bad for religion. And that's just one example of the way we're showing up right now is saying like, no, we actually want lots of diverse stories told. We want a lot of representation. And it's important that religious communities stand up against censorship, against discrimination, against against racism. And just show ways that we can come together for our society. So it's an exciting time for Interfaith Alliance, and I encourage anyone who's listening, if you want to learn more, to go to interfaithalliance.org and just find out what we're doing, because we're working in communities across the country, and I'm really excited to be meeting this moment that feels so riven with division and even hate. And so we're really trying to bring another vision for America forward.
Well, Paul, I am so thankful that Interfaith Alliance is out there doing this very important work, as well as you being at the helm of Interfaith Alliance. Just brings comfort and solace to my soul, and I really appreciate it. And, before Interfaith Alliance, you have had a very impressive career, and we couldn't tout that enough here at Good Faith Media. But at the same time, your core audience haven't necessarily been children per se. So, so what prompted you and inspired you to write a children's book?
Well, you're nice. It's very interesting. I had children pretty late. I have been. I actually did my stint, I will say, as a youth pastor. As many of us do out of seminary.
Many props on that.
That's
props.
cleverly left out of the bio.
Seattle First Baptist Church youth pastor. Hey, kids. But really, this this book was a labor of love, and it's really nice of you to include it in the conversation. But it actually is relevant to my broader work. But how it happened was I have two young kids, and that I'm a little bit of an older parent, but I have a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, and 4 years ago I was looking for a book to share my beliefs about Jesus and Holy Week and what what Jesus's teachings and life meant, and what the crucifixion meant and the resurrection. And I realized I didn't have like the story that would share that in a way that really felt authentic to the way I believe and to my own tradition. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm going to write it. And so I took to social media. I took a couple days, tried to get something under 1,000 words, and said, okay, I'm going to tell this story as a children's book. So before I put it on social media, I read it to my son. I wanted to test drive it. And I just said, hey, Walter, listen. And he's bouncing around and kind of listening. And, I made him stop his video game. And so it's a hard audience. And anyway, he listens and he goes, and at the end of it, I'm like, yeah, together we rise. And he kind of goes, okay, good. And I'm like, I guess that's as much as I'm going to get. But then at the supper table, totally unprompted, he just says, Jesus was about love. He wasn't about power over other people. I'm like, oh, now we're talking about Jesus at the supper table without me bringing it up.
Wow.
And now we're talking about God and what it means to love. And we're talking about things that matter. And we're having a conversation. And that's victory to me.
Absolutely.
So it was really a powerful idea that I was able to share this with him. And so then I just decided, you know what? I put it on Facebook and it blew up, and people from all different segments of my life, really said, this is amazing. This is what we need. I have chills right now, all this kind of really positive things. So I decided I would publish it and just go out and do it. And I got an amazing illustrator, and a friend of mine, Tim Gilman, said, I can produce it for you. And we just, we put it out there, and it really is like a representation of a kind of tradition, and not everybody's tradition. I recognize that, but important American tradition, which actually my great grandfather, who you mentioned in the intro, Walter Raushenbush, was a part of, which is this social idea of Christianity, and that Christianity and Jesus has something to say about us together, rising up together, and that Jesus in his death, but also in his resurrection, rising us all up together to be more loving to one another, and that all of us are part of God's heart, and that all of us are worthy of dignity and respect. So that it was a total labor of love, and it's been amazing to see the reception it's gotten.
Well, it is absolutely lovely.
So, Paul, I really believe that writing a children's book requires an author to choose every single word intentionally. You don't have 300 pages to get your point across or to capture their attention, so every word is important. After reading your book, I firmly believe that is still true, but one thing I appreciated was another layer. that the words left out are also very intentional. And so I want to see if you can talk to us a bit about the narrative, the way you framed it, from statements about God's creation being an expression of love for people of, quote, every color, gender, size, and shape, to the noticeably absent language of Jesus as a sacrifice for our sins. You seem to want the reader to have a very different takeaway than what I recall from my days in Sunday school. I really appreciated the way you framed the story and what I see as the takeaway. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and the intentionality within it.
Yeah, I really thank you for that question. And you're absolutely right. That's all very intentional. I mean, I really want everyone, every young person to see themselves as part of God's intentional creation. So like, and it's really important right now to, in a time when like there's, we have this a white Christian nationalism that really is like holding on to this idea of who matters and who counts in our world, and to say every person of every color, every gender, which is just offers a little bit more of expansion there, and size. We get shamed for our bodies so much and the way our bodies are formed. And so like it was really important that every one of them was very good. This idea that we're created very good. And so, the absence there of sin, as like they were created and they were all sinful and like really bad, it's not actually the biblical story. The biblical story is that we were created good. And then we turned against each other. And that is where sin comes into the story. And people hate each other and people harm each other. And so there's, but it was very intentional. I wanted people to, I wanted a young person to see and to hear, oh, I'm part of God's heart. I'm part of what's beautiful in the world. I was intended, as all of my complexity and like in my imperfection, like all of it, it was all intended. And then, the part about like the lack of sacrifice for that is very much, again, I want to go back to this. This is my tradition. I'm not saying it's everybody's tradition. Christianity has different strains of tradition, but this is an important tradition. And I remember reading in my own, in Walter Raushenbush's work about how the atonement theology was something rooted in the 13th century, and it wasn't what we needed in our time. We needed a sense of the crucifixion as a result of the powers that be being very, not being able to handle Jesus's vision of the kingdom of God on earth, and this with radical love, radical equality, radical justice, and that is a tradition. And so, like, I think it's important not to say that Paul's making stuff up. Actually, like it is rooted in a tradition that millions of Americans actually do share. And what happens, I think, often, and this is in our songs too, and sometimes in our liturgy, we say things we sing things that we don't actually still believe, but because it's still kind of there. And I think children's books can do a little bit of that too. And I remember back when I was a youth pastor, I hasten to remind that it's not in my bio, but I'm actually like, it was real for me. I remember being asked to read this book to the children. I was just like, what am I reading to them, and what are they hearing? And is this what I believe? And it was at a church that didn't preach that on Sunday, but we said this to kids. And so that's what this is trying to offer. Again, not for everybody. It's not, some people are not going to want this kind of theology, but I think many people who do hold to this kind of belief will find this a relief and find this as a kind of a liberating opportunity to talk to their kids. And the last thing I'll say is like, I'm not like, my kids may not end up being, Christian. We're going to church. We're introducing them to the tradition. We're inviting them into it. They may not decide to do that, but even in all the writing I've done, and I've written, when my children were born, I said, I don't care. I'm not gonna feel bad if you don't decide to be my same faith as I do,
Right.
but I want you to understand why I am this.
Yeah.
And this
I love
church
that.
kind of does that for me, for even non-Christians, to give them a chance to have an insight into why some of us love Jesus and are so inspired by Jesus, and in a way that isn't kind of like hit you over the head with a club. And instead it's like a very beautiful story about love.
Yeah, I love that.
That's
Well
what's,
said.
I think, so important for children. Like you said, there's language within the songs that we teach them, the books that we read them in a church setting. We don't even notice it's there. But for a child who's hearing it for the first time, we just don't realize what imprints we're making on their little self in a moment where that's not necessary. I just so appreciate that you focus on Jesus came to show us love, to remind us of God's love and creation. That's what his purpose was. And, when powers that be, when the systems around him didn't like that message, then things, didn't work out so great. But
yeah, well, I mean, children's book. The other thing I've realized since I've had kids is that children's books are often quite filled with shadows and death and difficulty and challenges. So children's books often have this sense of loss, sense of pain, and then resolution. And like this story has that. But it also has a story of friendship. Jesus, being befriending, the people, the misfits and the poor, and bringing them around him and celebrating them as like his friends. And also there's a few other little radical things that I'll just mention. Like if you see the Last Supper, there's actually women present, because women were so close to him. I mean, so it's not meant to subvert anybody's faith. It's just meant to invite, because women were there, the first ones to find, to experience the resurrection. And so it's really meant to just paint a picture of Jesus with his community, and then, what happened afterwards and what it means for all of us to rise together in the story of the resurrection.
Love the title so much. Well, as we know with children's books, Paul, the way a story is told visually is just as important as the words on the page. The illustrator of this book, Jin Shi, did a beautiful job with it. What did you communicate to her about your vision for the artwork, and what do you hope readers will notice about the imagery?
I mean, isn't it awesome?
Oh my gosh, it's so good.
It's beautiful.
I mean, it's stunning. And here's the cool thing about her. She came from China. She didn't know the Christian story.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of amazing to kind of have to really kind of tell her, this is what this means. And honestly, she was able, I was able to kind of paint a picture for her, with my words. And then she was able to really invent and imagine almost just as an artist and as someone who's imagining this story anew, what it could look like.
Right.
And the only kind of moments of misstep we had was when she was like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like. I'm going to Google it.
Oh.
Yeah. So for instance, when we were, showing the picture of Jesus on the cross, she came back with this Jesus super happy on the cross,
Right.
sacrificing, and isn't this awesome? And little birds floating around, and I was like, that's not actually the story we're telling here. It was really terrible.
Yeah.
And I reminded her, Jesus feeling abandoned and feeling, and thirsting and yet forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does it look like? And then, explaining her intentional choices about what it meant to have a brown-skinned Jesus with a multi-racial cast, and which, it was wonderful because she, as someone of Asian descent, was sure to put in Asian people as well as people of all different backgrounds who were part of the cast. And so we just had, it was really an exploration. She's young. She's kind of fresh out of SVA, really, really talented.
Mm-hmm.
She'd never done a children's book before. And, this is, I think, something she can be, she's really proud of, and she should be really proud of it.
Yeah.
I loved what you referred to earlier about the Lord's Supper, how there were women and men depicted on the page. And that's another thing that I hope the readers notice when they read that she put in there. I thought that was lovely.
Yeah, I mean, again, she didn't know.
Right.
And so and I just said, this is the Last Supper. It was the last time Jesus had dinner with his friends. And then, and that's when the Roman guards came. And so she did the drawing
Mm-hmm.
because she was basing it on everything else that had happened throughout his story. And, you know, and it made a lot of sense, you know, I mean, like it just, it is, it's refreshing to imagine, you know, the story. And especially as the other thing I tried to do, and we tried to do, is like, not to try to like situate it, like everybody has to be like in their like Middle Eastern garb. We kind of just said, like, let's not worry
Right.
too much about accuracy around
Sure.
that. Let's really just tell the story so it feels current and relevant, and not like over there and foreign to an audience today. I mean, it looks like it's a story today. So
Yeah.
it's exciting, but it's also like, it feels really important, and I'm, you know, so I'm very happy with
Yeah.
it.
I really appreciate the double challenge that you faced. One, boiling the story down to its simplicity, its beautiful simplicity for a child, as well as working alongside someone who was not a Christian or knew the Jesus story. Some of my most challenging moments as a pastor during my career have been when parents have walked through the doors and said, my kid is asking questions I can't answer. Here you go. To try to explain very complex issues on a child's level. They just, you know, they want an answer, but it's difficult for me to try to pare that down because we've gotten so used to the religious language and the overtones that we use telling this story. And then the same thing can be true speaking to someone who does not know the story and attempting to boil it down for them as well. So you had this double challenge. You pulled it off brilliantly, Paul.
I just want to say, like, I didn't write this for my current job. In fact, I started writing it before my current job, but it feels very relevant in the sense that, like, you know, I also I'm very worried about how Christianity is coming across in the public eye right now, because the very loud voices are the ones who are saying, we're gonna not serve you cake, or you know, because you're LGBT, or you know, we're gonna tell you what to do, what you can read, what you can do with your body, all these things. And you know, the people are using their faith, and it just feels really important to offer another testimony to why so many of us are attached to our faith tradition, and that Christians, you know, there's some great work being done by our colleagues at Baptist Joint Committee, Christians Against Christian Nationalism. There's a lot of people who are doing amazing work saying, don't speak for us. You don't speak for Christians, because if we let them speak for us, we're going to lose generations. And again, I'm not like, everyone has to be a Christian, but I would hate for people to turn against Christianity and Jesus just because the only people they're hearing are those who are representing a kind of a white Protestant Christian nationalist supremacist view, when actually many of us want to be part of a broader, multiracial, multi-religious, democratic, with a small d, society. So,
Absolutely.
so it turns out that it actually has this nice other function for me, which is like, I think all of us should speak from within our tradition into the broader body politic about multi-religious collaboration and celebration.
So, speaking of other voices speaking for us, leads beautifully into my next question, which is, in addition to your recently released book, you might have heard about another recent release causing quite a stir, which is the God Bless America Bible. So I want to know, what are your thoughts? Has the competition caused a dip in your sales? And what would you say to our listeners who might be shopping for a gift and trying to decide between Together for Rise and the God Bless America Bible? What do you say?
Well, Jesus is now himself, because, you know, as an American, Jesus really is actually bundling these books together.
Gotcha.
So I'm very proud to say that we have a package deal. So yeah,
Oh my goodness.
you know, the great line, you know, if English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough
That's
for
right.
me. It actually has not caused a dip in my sales.
I'm
very glad to
surprised.
say.
Shocker.
But it is one of those like kind of amazing moments where you just kind of, I think we're at a moment where we're very curious about how religion is being um, deployed
Right.
within the election, and what it means to kind of own religion, and what, when people say make America pray again, like what they mean, and in the context of commentary such as, if they don't like our religion, we're going to send them back. And these people are coming and poisoning our bloodstream. And in the context of saying these immigrants, I don't even think they're human. I mean, that's the context into which you present a Bible that says God bless America. And so I think it's important to recognize that surround sound, because you also have to kind of weigh Jesus's words against the words that are the surround sound of Trump presenting a Bible, and what it means for, again, the kind of putting America and the American flag and putting it kind of wrapping the Bible up in the American flag, and insisting that we are a special thing for God and for Christianity. It feels very problematic to me as an American, but then also as a faith leader. And what has been interesting is to see how many, even Trump supporters who are conservative Christians, are very like skeptical of this moment, and very like kind of, what are you doing here? Why are you like, why are you so desperate for money? And so, I was in an article in Newsweek about this, with that was actually a lot about Eric Erickson, who is not someone who I'm often paired with as far as theology, but he was really concerned about it from a very conservative evangelical perspective.
Right.
I was concerned about it as someone who represents a hope for an interfaith and multi-faith and multi-belief and America. And so when this starts to be, again, like the way America is understood, and wrapping this Bible in an American flag, and with the Pledge Allegiance and all of that, it feels like it puts American democracy at risk, because it was intended never to be subsumed to any one religious tradition, but to invite all religious traditions. And it also, in some ways, makes a mockery of the Bible,
It really
which,
does.
of course, never intended to be an instrument for American exceptionalism.
Well, if there are any listeners out there who are on the fence of buying the God Bless the USA Bible or Together We Rise, an Easter story for us all, we highly recommend save your $60.
Right.
Buy Together We Rise. In fact, buy several copies of it, because it's just that good.
That's right. So I have one last quick question that I want to know the answer to. Should your book find its way to libraries in places like, I don't know, Texas, Florida, is it going to be banned?
I think it's wouldn't that be great?
That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. But is it the inclusion or the love part of it that's going to get it banned?
I feel like I hope that Jesus's radical love of people from every background and every size, shape, gender, color, and I hope that gets through enough so that people understand that this is actually a subversive, wonderful idea, and that we should welcome in our society, but that might scare some people. Because
Amen.
the gospel of the beloved kingdom, or the kingdom of God on earth as in heaven, is a wondrous and in some ways terrifying thought so my hope is that people will take it seriously enough, the invitation to the beloved community, that they might be a little worried about this book. But even more, like, kidding aside, my hope is that people understand that this invitation really is to everyone, and it's not just an invitation to become a Christian. Again, this is not about that. It's to represent an idea for our world that keeps hope in front of all of us.
Well, the new book is Together We Rise, an Easter story for us all. Paul Raushenbush, President and CEO of Interfaith Alliance, thank you so much for joining us this week on Good Faith Weekly. But Paul, as you know, before we let you go, we've got one last question that we ask all of our guests. So, Missy, take it away.
So, Paul, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
My more to tell is actually about Good Faith Media.
Oh,
It's like, seriously, like, I hope everyone listening understands the act of participating in storytelling and the hearing of voices that may be new, may be challenging, and the work that you two are doing in order to showcase the breadth of the spiritual life of our nation. We need so much more of that. And so my hope is that your listeners understand the gift that you're offering to the world, that they will financially support you, but also share, the resources that you guys are putting into the world. It's incredible what you're doing.
Oh, thanks, Paul.
And it's so valuable to people like me who are out there in the world doing the work. If we don't have the stories that surround the work, we can't do the work. And so what you're offering is essential. And I just want to say the more to tell is that you all are telling it. And I'm so grateful for it.
Oh, thank you, Paul. We really appreciate those kind words. They mean the world to us. And again, thank you so much for being a guest this week on Good Faith Weekly.
I love being with you every time.
Paul is always a delight, Missy. I have gotten to know him a little bit better over the last few years since he has assumed the duties at Interfaith, and I really like him.
So the conversation was so fun, and the book is great. It really reminded me of how much teaching children about faith and about the stories in the Bible is such a trip. I mean,
it's a challenge.
It's so challenging, but I was kind of thinking about some funny times, we had with our kids as they were growing up of, they point things out that are so obvious to them and you think, oh no. And I was thinking about the time, how kids, they're in church and they're coloring and that you think they're not paying attention but yet they're absorbing everything. Right. So I'm remembering when one of our kiddos was in elementary school and you had preached a sermon about Samson and Delilah. And we were on the way home and we never got to ride to church together because you always went early and came late. So it's just me and the boys. And I just thought they weren't paying attention at all. I said, well, what did you guys learn today? And one of the kids, I won't call him out, you got a 50% chance of getting this one right, said, it's like, what did you learn today from the sermon? And he's like, don't trust girls. And it's like, I can see how you get there at 8 years old, right? That makes perfect sense in your mind. But so that was one time. And then another time, I remember having a conversation, and one of them had asked, "What do you want us to do with you when you die," or something? And you were talking about wanting to be cremated, and one of the kids said, "Oh, that's awesome! We can use your ashes for Ash Wednesday."
I do remember that.
But it's just things like that force you to really unpack the narrative that is so ingrained you don't think about anymore. And then even from an adult perspective, what Paul was saying about the illustrator who did not know the story.
Oh, that's
and
such a
then
beautiful
she
story.
drew
Yes.
the Last Supper with, people of all genders and
Right.
ethnicities, and just how beautiful that is. And I am so envious of someone who can come to the story that fresh.
Right.
Even
Yeah.
if historically accurate facts are that it was all men and his friends, which, culturally and all that would make sense, but how beautiful it is to be able to come to the story with that fresh eye.
Yeah. One of my favorite things as a pastor was teaching these stories. And you and I had a class that we taught several times for newcomers. And in the churches that we served in, we, for whatever reason, ended up having quite a few people who did not grow up in church, had no church background, and in some instances, no faith background whatsoever. So when we're talking about a story in the Bible, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, they would raise their hand and ask these questions that made me pause, because the theological jargon that we have grown up with has become rote. And we just use it and not even think about it. But trying to communicate that with someone who did not grow up in that context is challenging. And I love it because it forces me to rethink these stories and to rethink these ideas that I have grown up. And that's one of the things I've been doing for quite some time now.
And I love what Paul said about, I'm going to paraphrase here, but he was talking about, exposing his own children to his faith. And he said, I understand this isn't necessarily what they may choose.
Right.
He said, but yet I want to show them why I choose to follow Jesus and his ways. And that to me just spoke of a compelling love.
Yes.
Not a love, not a guilt trip, not a fear-based faith. But come along on this journey. I want to show you what I see in this, person of Jesus and this person that I choose to emulate and follow in my life. And I thought that was really beautiful. Like we talked about, he didn't camp out on Jesus as a sacrifice, that we've been taught and all of these things. He talked about Jesus as love and coming to teach us love.
And that's one of the things that I've been attempting to do over the last couple of decades when I was introduced to the theologian who we lost way too early, Marcus Borg. And Dr. Borg used to talk about demythologizing the text. And it wasn't a criticism of the text or a criticism of the grandeur and beauty of these mythologies that we've held, dear for, decades upon decades. It was an attempt to discover the humanness within these stories and the connections that we find not only within humanity, but with humanity and God's creation. And the way we do that is by trying to wade through all of the jargon and all of the rhetoric and all the preconceived notion and concentrate on the identity of the characters we're reading about and what they're doing in those stories. And Paul does this beautifully in the children's book. It's about Jesus, and what did Jesus do best? Jesus loved. And the way he loved is that he brought justice for those who had none. And that boils down the gospel. And I love that. And that inspires me. That helps me continue to believe and to be a Jesus follower and to follow his teachings and to be a part of this larger community, because it is based upon love, and love that brings justice, especially those who are marginalized and oppressed.
I agree. I thought that was a really beautiful just imagery within the book. The overarching theme of the book is just that we are all part of God's love, God's heart. And that is what we're here to emulate. We are here to rise together. And I thought that it's just such a beautiful ending. When I read it, I did get chills. So I just really appreciate the book. I appreciate Paul, all the work that he's doing and how he continues to teach us.
Absolutely. So after this, make certain that you pick up Paul's book.
And a copy for a friend.
And a copy for a friend. Absolutely. Because it is just a beautiful story about Jesus and the Easter story. And it's really not only for Easter, but it's for everybody throughout the years.
Absolutely. A good reminder that love is what compels us. And that should be what compels us.
Amen. Good sermon.
Oh, you're welcome. Now for the invitation.
Well, here's the invitation. One last time. You were right. I was wrong.
It never gets old.
Well, thanks for tuning in to Good Faith Weekly. We appreciate each and every one of you. Until next week, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.